let's dive into this thing. It's actually pretty simple in its construction. So we're going to start at the very beginning and we're going to listen to what we hear. So before the beat comes in, we basically have a bass melody here for the first 8 bars. So I'm going to map this out quickly. I don't know if I'm hitting the exact notes. I'm just doing this by ear. It's just because I've done it a lot. So I'm going to map generally what this melody looks like. Cool. So important to note, the bass melody changes throughout the 8 bars. So it's not a 2-bar loop that's repeating. It's not a 4-bar loop that's repeating. No, this melody in total takes 8 bars. That's important to note because now we can consider this song at this point to be moving on an 8-bar cycle, because once we get to this point, this melody is going to repeat. And so this kind of just sets the tone and sets the pace for the song. So let's now hear what happens next. Interesting, right? We have another 8 bars here of one new conglomeration of sounds, and then you'll notice it's going to pick up even more so here, which is interesting because, again, this bass line melody here kind of set the tone with that 8-bar cycle. So now you can see that we're going to kind of keep moving forward with this 8-bar cycle. So the bass melody is actually staying the same here. It's just repeating. You can listen to that again if you want to verify. But let's also see what else comes into the game. So we have a kick drum. Let's map that out. Pretty simple. We also have a 2-4, which if you've watched this before, you know what that is. Basically, the 2 and the 4 is the second and the fourth beat in a measure. This is often where something like a clap or a snare appears. I'm just not going to call it a clap or a snare. I'm going to call it 2-4 just because it's more general and I like that. So let's map that out. Now I want you to note something too. This is definitely getting more into the details of everything. There's 2 types of claps that happen. There's the first clap, which happens on the 2. And I add this extra note because there's a little something extra on the clap. If you have nice headphones or good speakers, you'll be able to hear this a little easier. And then on the 4, you just have this 1. Now, if you can't hear that, I'm going to ask you to listen. And listen how this clap has a little extra something. If you have headphones, it's going to be easier because it has a little layered clap that's hitting a lot of the stereo. And this actually repeats every other clap. So try and hear that for yourself. Hopefully you heard it. If not, don't worry too much about it. I'm just giving that detail for people who want to know. And, keep listening. It's definitely a thing. But yeah, so that's what we got going on there. Also, it might just be interesting to note, you'll see this happen in songs where they have slightly different claps on the 2 versus on the 4. And this can be cool just to give you a way to give yourself variation within just something like a 2-4, because oftentimes you might just use the same sample on the 2 and the 4, and that's cool, and that'll work a lot of the time. But hey, if you're bored, maybe try layering one of the claps but not one of the other ones. Maybe layer the 2 but not the 4, maybe layer the 4 but not the 2. It's just an idea. So I also hear a hat going on here. Let's map that out. All right. I also hear something happening on the 1 and the 3. It sounds like some high-end percussion, almost like a high bongo. And by 1 and 3, I just mean if you're counting the tempo out as 1, 2, 3, 4, then the 1 is just the 1 and the 3 is the 3. Kind of like we had the 2 and the 4, we can also have the 1 and the 3. So now I'm going to mark out 1, 3 percussion. Cool. I think that's it in terms of percussion. And I think that's it in terms of this whole section. Or actually, no. I take that back. We're going to have a lot of these little, I'm going to label them tidbits. And maybe you'll see why. But let's just listen first. So did you hear that sample thing here? So that's what I mean. Let's just forget about the tidbits. We'll come back to that. All right, sample. Write that in. Cool. So the sample is nice because remember we're moving in the main melody is an 8-bar phrase, but oftentimes in music it's cool to break things up every 4 bars or every 2 bars. Even if the overall thing is 8 bars, we can still have like this sub reset that is triggered by the sample. And when I say sub reset, I mean something about this sample hitting us takes us away from what we've been hearing. So then when we repeat the cycle, we have a fresher mind and this part is more interesting again, just like it was over here. So this sample helps do that. Right around this section, we have even more stuff happening. So we have this little synth melody. I'll call it little melody because it's just that little synth fill. Let's just call it synth fill. Biddly-doo-doo-doo. We have this sample hitting again. Let's call it old school sample. Just, it sounds kind of old school. And now we have a vocal sample happen too, so let's type that in. Let's map that. Cool. So now we're going to get back to that tidbit piece because we already talked about this old school sample trigger, how it kind of helps reset us here. But these things do too. So this little synth fill, it's just a nice little variation for us to hear. It makes us go, oh, that was cool. What was that? Same with the vocal sample. And I think especially this vocal sample, because it just has a certain vibe that it kind of starts to function as a hook. If you watch the Lady Gaga or Britney Spears videos, you'll remember that, I mean, technically, actually, almost all the songs we've done breakdowns of have hooks, but especially in these big pop songs, like a hook is usually this melodic phrase, or it doesn't actually have to be melodic. It's just a thing in music that's like simple to digest and is really catchy and kind of like contagious almost because it sounds so cool and your brain remembers it so well. So I'm gonna think of this as a hook, but this vocal sample. So this is cool because yeah, it helps like reset the 8-bar cycle here, but it also gives our brains something interesting to hear that also is memorable. So then when we're thinking about this song later, we'll remember this little. So I really like that. So okay. Now, I was going to say you could label all of these things tidbits if you want, just because they're just little things. They just pop in real quick, but they play a big role. So this might just be a way to think of things that play that role of like they just jump in towards the end of a cycle, add something new, keep it going. So that might be a way to think about it. So let's see what else happens. everything from the previous part is still happening, and you're kind of starting to get an idea of how this song's being constructed now. Again, we're moving in 8-bar intervals still. So remember, we start with just the bass line for 8 bars, then we added drums for 8 bars, and now in this section we're adding new melodic pieces. So right now our main melodic piece has just been the bass line. This main bass melody is really carrying the track. It's kind of the main point. But now, from 17 to 25, from these bars, we're getting more than just the bass melody in terms of like big melodies that drive the track. So one that I hear, I'm going to call it the soft synth. Basically, this is a really smooth sounding synth that's playing a nice little melody. So listen for that. Here we go. So I'm referring to that thing that's going do 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 do. So that's the soft synth melody. So I'm gonna type that out more or less what it looks like. Something like that. Now I want to point out, I think it's interesting to note that this synth melody, it's really special. It's playing a big role in this song. It's giving us something to keep listening to. It's giving us reason to keep enjoying the bass line from earlier. But like the bass line from earlier, it does have an 8-bar cycle. So you'll find that the beginning of the synth melody here, whoops. It's the same as the beginning over here for the same synth. See, they're the same here and here, but the thing is, their second halves are different here and here. So they could have had this part. They could have had it play again over here, but instead they changed it. So that's cool because even though the first parts of the melodies are the same, because you have this change on the ending, when you combine it all together, you get one 8-bar phrase. So this is nice because, again, remember, this track's kind of been moving in 8-bar chunks, so it would make sense that another big part of the game, which is this new synth melody, also moves in an 8-bar cycle, because now we're continually creating this beautiful 8-bar cycle that we're going to keep repeating. So I hear something else happening. It's some sort of like keys, like some sort of like piano sort of thing. So this one's a little harder to map out. There's a lot of stuff happening, but I'm gonna try. So here we go. So the important thing is you hear piano keys playing, and then you also hear this do 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 do. I'm gonna make these two the same because this actually functions like a hook as well. This little do do do. It's just really memorable. It sticks out a lot, and it's easy to comprehend. Spoiler alert: the piano phrase is only a 4-bar loop, unlike the soft synth and the bass melody. So that's just going to repeat like that. The thing that's really important with this is, again, we're just getting like added depth. Once this piano comes in, the track is getting a little more dramatic, a little more luscious, a little more full. So we're really diving into this atmosphere that's set, this kind of nostalgic, on a hike sort of vibe that's going on. This is just really accentuating that. Plus we're getting another hook with this little... So that's giving us another thing for our brain to process, and that's really interesting and hook-like slash, again, I would just call that a hook. And that's what's interesting is you like, yeah, this is some like indie electronic track or whatever, but we've got lots of hooks happening, and this is probably why, at least on Spotify, it is let's see. On Spotify, it's their most popular track. So maybe this is probably partially why. It's also a short track, so it's easier to get into, I think. And the vibe is just really cool. Another thing I hear, it sounds like the vocal samples are happening more often. Yep, so now they're happening every 2 bars. There. Okay, so now we got everything going on here. We got the bass melody, we got the soft synth melody, and we have the piano phrase. I want to point out too, if you watch the video where we dissected Is This Power by the Field, something similar happens. In Is This Power by the Field set up 3 main melodic / harmonic phrases that played over each other, and they played over each other in such a way that it was just super pleasant to hear over and over again. And I just find it interesting that in this track we basically have a very similar thing happening, at least, where we're having these 3 melodic parts that when you play them over and over again, it just continues to sound great. So yeah, so let's see what happens after these 8 bars. So we're basically having like a little break on this part. The bass line's dropping out. I want to listen again because it sounds like the kick drops out here, but I can actually hear like a little 808 kick on the low end. So I want to hear if I can hear that 808 here as well. So I might not be right here, but you can hear the kick that we've heard the whole time during this part, but then here it sounds like there still is a knock that a kick would make, but it's really low. So I'm guessing, again, this is just a guess, that they have like an acoustic kick layered with an 808, and it might be in the track the whole time, the 808, just providing additional beef to the main kick. But at least in this part you can actually hear it more because I think they drop out the acoustic part of the kick. So I'm going to map that real quick. Yeah, it's really just hitting on every one. It's hitting on the 1 and the 3. If you have headphones or speakers, just really listen for it. It's there. Oh, and by the way, this synth fill has only happened here. Okay. So that's basically it. Yeah, like again, this is really simple. So we just drop the bass melody here. We keep the drums in. I think we have the hats going still. We drop out the vocal samples. So now this kind of really brings our attention to that piano and soft synth part. So let's listen again, and we're going to listen into this next section, and then we'll talk about what happens in this next section. Cool. So right after this breakdown, we come back into the full beat. There is one other thing. So remember this melody here, this nice soft synth melody. So on this part, we're getting, it sounds like it might be the same synth or maybe a different synth, but an octave up as well. So see how now we're getting 2 octaves for the synth melody. I say this because if you listen on this part of the track, which is about 1:31, you hear this same melody being played a little bit higher up in the song. You can hear the melody being played like in an airy way up high. So I'm going to compare this part to this part, where I think this section and this section are all the same except for you get this high air in the melody. So listen to this one first. Listen for the high. It's kind of wispy sounding. It's actually probably a different synth, but I think I'm just going to keep it in the same track because I like conceptually looking at it like this, because as you remember, at least in a lot of our pop songs we've done, they are always trying to keep building up. And the pop songs are usually switching from an A section to a B section to a C section, versus this song is just one long A section, except the cool thing is that they are still building up energy. For example, we start with a little, then we add some stuff here after 8 bars, then we add some more stuff after 8 bars, then we have a little breakdown where we drop some stuff out, then we come back into the main shebang, but we added a higher octave. So now we are still adding stuff, but we're also still riffing off of something from before. So by adding things, this is how we're able to keep hearing an awesome groove, which was this groove right here, but in a new way, because now we have another element. So now everything sounds new and fresh. And so then for the rest of the track, they just repeat that groove, because this groove is kind of like the peak roygbiv. It's just like the peak of this track. It's what's cool about it. And so they're just like, you know what? This sounds so cool. Let's just repeat it a few times, and then we're just going to fade out and let this thing play out until we reach a volume of 0. And it's really cool. So let's listen a little bit, but that's about it. It's one big section moving in 8-bar intervals. I mean, there is some movement in 4 bars here with the drop out of the kick, but in general, this is an 8-bar interval sort of track. And yeah, let's just hear that outro one more time. It's such a nice track, and it's really fun.